Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Umar Suleiman, and I'd like to welcome you to this special episode of the British Board of Scholars and Imams podcast. Well, it's more of a discussion actually with our dear Mashaykh, Sheikh Salman Hassan and Sheikh Imran. And today we're going to be discussing student financing or student loans, depending on how you look at it. And this topic has actually been discovered at quite length between the various scholars and du'at who are connected with the BBSI and also outside of it. It was actually triggered by this recent discussion on whether student financing is permissible or not has surfaced again in the last couple of years, even though I believe the discussion has been going on for a number of years. Some scholars have already taken a position on it being permissible. Others have said, no, it's still impermissible, which we're going to discuss the different arguments kind of for and against, inshallah. But the crux of the discussion today is about how the various scholars at BBSI came to look at the actual contract. And this then led to a paper which is going to be issued very shortly, inshallah, that goes into the detail of how to look at student financing. There was also a symposium that was held on this, as well as other discussions that have happened, both in person and online around it. So without further ado, I just want to add here also that alhamdulillah, we have our dear scholars, Sheikh Salman and Sheikh Imran here, who both have a deep understanding of finance as well as the fiqh. And Sheikh Salman, of course, has a background in law. So it's really important that when we're looking at contracts in the modern age, that we're able to also understand what's happening on an actual basis, not just from a fiqh side, but the reality of what's happening with that contract. So we'll start with the student loan or student financing itself. So my understanding, please correct me both of yourselves, is the way that it works is that you choose, you want to go to university, your university makes you an offer, and then if you're eligible for student financing, you would apply through the student loans company it's called, and they will pay your university directly your tuition fees. It's around £9,000 a year at the moment. And so from the moment they pay those fees, a obligation, I would argue, or would say, or they say even, is created that you have to pay back that money, and they will charge RPI plus, I believe it's 3% now. Well, now the latest iteration is just RPI, but they will charge what's known as an interest rate for that money that was being given on your behalf to the university. So that's one element of them giving the money. The moment that you finish university, the student loans company will look at how much you earn. And if you earn above a threshold, then they will take 9% of what you earn until the amount that you owe them is paid back. And if you never earn above that amount at the beginning, then you don't owe them anything. And after 30 years, and now it's 40 years with the latest iteration, if you haven't paid them back, then there is no debt or obligation on you. Now, I've used the various terms there. Have I largely explained it correctly, or have I missed anything?
Yeah, so I think what we need to do is really understand exactly what it says in the contract, because ultimately it's what the contract says that is what's enforceable in the court. So as a lawyer, I always look at what are the obligations in the contract and what's enforceable in a court of law if it ends up in the court. And so I've done the pretty difficult job of actually reading the whole contract and also the statutory instrument. It's a complex contract. It's not an easy contract to read. It consists of 3 documents, and one of them is a very long statutory instrument. And you have to read all of those 3 documents and all of the different provisions within it all together. And the extra difficulty is it's a contract that actually contradicts itself. There's language in some parts of the contract that appears to contradict language in other parts of the contract.
Before we get into that, I want to step back. Your definition, accurate,
yeah,
but it was really long and complicated. By because it needs to be.
Yeah.
Because it needs to be, because it's a complicated contract. So let's try a simple example.
Please.
You come to me, you go to university, I say, fine, I'll give you £9,000 to go to university. You pay £9,000 every year. This is not a student loan company, this is Sheikh Imran finance company, yeah? Haram Riba contract, for example. I'll give you, right?
Yeah.
So I'll give you £9,000.
Yeah.
Okay, then you got to start paying me back. If you pass away, so you still got debt to me, for example, right? And I can say to you, you got to pay me this back, and the interest rolls up. But you pass away, you don't work, you still got to pay me back. Is this the same as a student loan company?
Well, the student loan company says that you'll give me money and I have to pay you back more than what you've given me.
I'm not talking about that bit. I'm saying, what's the difference here? That if I got a loan, you owe me money.
Yeah.
Right? But if why did you do my contract is very simple. You borrow me money, you got to pay me back money. Okay?
Yes.
I don't care if you go to education, I don't care if you fail.
No, that's a clear debt.
Right? It's a clear debt, right?
Yeah.
So that's very different to what you described, isn't it? Is it or isn't it?
It is, because there's these caveats with.
Before we get to the details of the legal contracts, I think it's important to try and understand what these things are. What are the differences you're talking about then? You're talking about the liability to the money that they own? What else are the things in there? So is that the main thing you're talking about here?
It is, because I think the average person, when they look at the student financing contract, it says in there that you owe, and these are the terms they use. So we can understand why the average person who isn't familiar with the law, legal terminology and so on, they will just see that you owe this money. Okay, so it's going to be RPI, so the retail price index is increasing, and it was plus 3%.
The RPI that's kind of, let's leave that aside.
Yeah, so let's
increasing.
look at what we mean by this obligation, or you owe this money, because the contract uses the language of debt, of loan, of repayment, and owing the money.
It's quite scary.
It is quite
That's
scary.
a legal thing. What's the other example we have? Yeah, we have the loan example, which is the clear interest loan. Then we have another example. I say, someone comes to me and says, I want to be a, I don't know, car mechanic, some job you have to do, yeah? I say, fine, I'll invest in your business. I'll give you 20 grand, 30 grand, your training courses, pay for your shop, startup, whatever you need to do. Then I'll basically take a percentage share of your business, say 50% up to 50 grand. Is this the same as the first situation?
No.
What's the difference?
That you're just taking a percentage of what I earn. That I wouldn't feel that I owe you that money in every circumstance.
So it's kind of like an investment contract.
Yeah.
I'll say if you go bankrupt or you're a useless mechanic and nobody comes to you because you break his car.
Cheers.
The key thing, it's not a debt.
It's not a debt.
So we've got two very different types of contract. The loan interest, we've got like an investment type trade contract. So where, Sheikh Salman, does this student loan thing fit in that?
Yeah, so if you look at the features of the student loan, if you look at the actual payment obligations, what the student is obligated to pay, what's their liability, there actually isn't anything in there that suggests it's a debt. And that's the thing. So when you read the contract, you see that there's a language of debt, yes, but actually when you look at the actual enforceable obligations, there is no debt. I can't find any debt there.
Okay.
Because what's the student's obligation? Their obligation is if they earn money, and they don't have to, or they might try but not be able to, if they succeed in having an income, then they give a certain percentage of that income to the government per year for a certain period of time. And that's it.
So I say, it says a contract, it's a debt, you got to owe me this money interest. Mm-hmm. Doesn't that mean it's a debt or interest? Because I say
not necessarily, because sometimes you have words or a form of a contract, but that doesn't reflect in the substance of the contract. And there's a really important Sharia maxim here, which says that in financial contracts, what's important, according to the Sharia, is the intention of the parties, the maqasid, and the ma'ani, the substance, actually what happens as an outcome of the contract. So it's the maqasid wal ma'ani, la bil alfadhi wal mabani. So the Sharia doesn't look at the words or the particular form of the contract if that's not what's going to happen as an outcome of the contract.
So you're saying we got to go take the contracts, digest them, and work out the actual cash flows of the situation to understand what the contract actually entails, opposed to just because they've written loads of words in it. You can ignore the words.
We have to understand this thing called iltizam. In Sharia, we call it iltizam, which means the obligation or the liability on the contracting party. Here, it's the student. What is their actual obligation? Does that iltizam consist of a debt, which in Arabic we call dain, which attaches to their personal liability, which we call dhimma? So is it dainun fi dhimma? And this is a really, really important concept. And Sheikh Ibrahim, you've got a really good explanation for that, haven't you? What dhimma means.
So dhimma is like your personal liability.
I called you Ibrahim, you're Imran.
Sorry. So we've got personal liability.
Throw him into the fire. That one.
All right. So we've got dhimma. This is your personal liability. It's like you can think of yourself like you have this corporal body around you, and this thing is attached to you like glue. So if, let's say it's 11:45, Dhuhr time's not come in, you have no obligation currently to pay Dhuhr. The time for Dhuhr, the adhan comes for Dhuhr, that's like conceptually, I've got this obligation now attached to you that you have to fulfill.
Yeah.
But the default thing is, bara dhimma, you don't have obligations until we can establish them by Sharia. So you walk around, you're thinking like, Umar, what obligations do you have right now? You've got Isha times come in. So this obligation we have right now established. So to establish, your default position is you don't have obligations. We have to establish them. But the idea of thinking like you have a conceptual body around you that you glue these things attached it to. They can be strong obligations, they can be weak obligations, but they're attached obligations. We talked about obligations here.
Yeah,
can we go into the two examples we gave? The investment contract with Umar, the useless mechanic. We have the loan where we basically give him.
In fact, I'd like to use two examples here. And to the ordinary person, they could look very similar.
Okay.
But I'd like to make a really important distinction using these two examples. And that is, if I give you a loan and I say this loan is a debt, it attaches to your personal liability.
All right.
So if you die, it will pass on to your estate. Your heirs will inherit the debt, right? It's something that you're obligated to do and repay as a loan, as a debt, right? But I'm going to be slightly friendly with you and allow your repayments to match your income or your cash flows, right? So in any month, if you earn a bit more, you'll pay a bit more. If you earn a bit less, you'll pay a bit less, right? What that means is you have friendly repayment terms, but it's still a debt that attaches to your liability.
Ultimately, I still
right?
owe the money.
And it's still haram, because if there's interest charged on that, that's haram.
Yeah.
That's very different to when I give you a bit of money and I say, you have no obligation to pay that back to me as a personal liability. Yeah. Your only obligation is if you earn some income as a result of having invested that money, either in your education or your training or in a trade, to give me a share of that income from that activity. Right. That's very different. That doesn't attach to your personal liability. It attaches to your income.
Yeah.
You see? So one attaches to your personal liability, the other attaches to the fruit of your investment or income.
Okay.
So what are the characteristics of the attachment of a dain, which is basically iltizam on him? You're saying that, so if we get a simple criteria, we can say, if Umar passes away, the debt's still subject to his estate. Yeah. That's basically bound, it's iltizam on him, yeah?
Exactly.
Or for example, I say to you, till you die, this you can pay, and if you die, your children will pay it. That's a fixed debt. Mm-hmm. But if I say to you, for example, Umar, you're 35, 40 years of work, you hit pension age, you hit 65, and the debt's forgiven. It's no longer bound to his personality. Is that what you're saying to me? It's not iltizam if it sunsets, or it's not passed on to his estate. Is that what we can say as a criteria?
If there's no ability on the quote-unquote lender to ever get to him if he doesn't have an income from that activity, that doesn't attach to his personal liability. I would say that's the criteria.
So you're saying because it's income-based. Yeah. But isn't it also the fact that because it can't be passed on to his children? So if Umar,
that's also one of the indicators that it doesn't attach to his liability, personal liability.
Because you could say to me, for example, we have this loan being paid, yeah? It's paying 9%, it's friendly payments back and forth, increases, decreases income, but it still gets rolled up a bigger and bigger amount. Mm-hmm. Then you pass away, and you still owe that outstanding balance.
That's attached to the personal liability. Exactly.
So if it's not, because he passes away and it's not attached to his liability, he's no obligation to pay it back, or he gets retired, he's no obligation to pay, we work 35 years. Yeah. This is the criteria we can say that this is not iltizam and that is iltizam.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because the friendly terms, I understand that makes it more akin to, it's like, what is this? It's not a standard loan I'm paying back. It's like, it depends how much earnings, quite nice terms. It's not a traditional loan we think in that way. But the fact that you still have to pay after you die makes it a loan.
Exactly.
The fact that, so that's iltizam. So that's the first thing. Why is that important, the iltizam thing in the card?
Because if you look at the way riba is prohibited, in this context, of course, the definitions and the discussion of riba in fiqh are complex. We're not going to go into that here. But in this context, in the context of a simple loan of money, the Sharia doesn't allow me to lend you that money for you to have iltizam to repay that money as a debt. An iltizam that attaches to your personal liability, and then for me to charge more on top of that. That's haram.
Okay. We step back a second, but what's the default position in contracts? Are all contracts prohibited by start off? Do we say they're permissible? We define
so this goes back to a really important Sharia principle, which is that the fundamental starting position in Sharia is that of permissibility, al-ibaha, right? And so the jurist, when we analyze a contract, we don't look for signs of permissibility in the contract. We don't have to prove the contract is permissible because it's
The
permissible
default
by
position.
default.
Yeah.
The person who claims it's not permissible, the onus is on them to prove that it contains a prohibited element.
So like we said that beforehand, bara dhimma, so your obligations or your personal liability is clear by default. That's your default position. Then you'll basically have no obligations by default. In this case, the contracts by default are prohibited until we find something.
Exactly.
Which istigad basically is your obligation, but basically attaches to your liability.
That's right.
In the same way, the contract by default is clear
Mm-hmm.
until we find something in the contract which is from the prohibited issues. What are the
Exactly.
prohibited issues we said?
Yeah, so those scholars and those members
Yeah.
of the community who believe the student loan contract is prohibited,
Yeah.
they will point to the fact that there's a principal capital amount that's forwarded to the student. There's the word interest is used in the contract. The word debt is used. The word repayment is. They point to these words, and they will make the conclusion or the assumption from those words that there is a debt,
Okay.
and that debt attaches to the personal liability of the student. That's an
But if we take a generic contract,
Right.
what things are we looking for prohibition? Riba, what else? Anything else on there?
well, there's a prohibition of gharar,
Yeah, which is uncertainty.
which
Which is like lottery tickets. It's prohibited as a contract
Right.
because you're not paying something you don't know you're going to get back.
Yeah.
There's unnecessary uncertainty in that.
yeah.
That's
But
not the
that
principal
doesn't
issue
really apply
To
to
student loans,
the
that's fine.
situation,
So riba, ghara, and anything else?
Yeah.
Oppression, dhulm.
Yeah, that's right.
The
yeah.
substance of the contract has to be permissible generally.
Yeah.
And the underlying item.
That's that.
But
So
I mean,
it says that the principles are with the exchange, the counter values are permissible. There's no riba, there's no oppression,
Yeah.
no ghara. Are these broadly what we're saying we're looking for?
Yeah. In
And the
principle.
prohibitions people coming up with are saying this contract has riba in it. They're not complaining about the counter values being prohibited. It's money. They said it's fine.
Yeah.
They said the dhulm is not a big issue being discussed in the contract. The ghara is 4 pages, so 4 contracts. It's quite nailed down and quite certain and clear.
Yeah.
So it's basically the riba thing is the big
That's
point.
the issue.
That's
Yeah,
that's
the issue at hand,
that's a
yeah.
fulcrum. That's
Yeah.
a crux of the issue we need to basically dig into.
so when you look at the student financing contract, so we start from a position of permissibility, and as you said, that the clauses which would make it impermissible is riba, based on debt.
Yeah. So the onus is on those who claim it is
Yeah.
riba to prove from an analysis of the contract
Yeah.
that debt or there is a debt which attaches to the personal liability of the student.
Yeah.
And that's the analysis required.
Can you give me so we talked about the investment example beforehand with
Yeah.
mechanic. Is that a debt too? So when we hit Omar as a mechanic and say, is it a debt on him? Or can we take an example of I invest in somebody's business?
Mm-hmm.
We can say that's got similar cash flows. I lend you £100,000 to be whatever. You owe me £100,000 plus 20%, for example.
Mm-hmm.
You own in the cash. But I go to you and I lend you £100,000 for your business. I say you got to pay me back £120,000 from the profit of the business. These look from the outside to have a similar cash flow. Why are these different?
Because the liability is different.
Okay.
Because in an investment contract,
Yeah.
your liability, if you make a loss, you have no liability except to return whatever's left of the capital.
So this was a point I was coming to, was with the student finance contract, when we look at it. So these two, so there's debt, which debt by itself isn't prohibited. I think it's for viewers, for them to understand, debt by itself, if you give me £100 and I owe you £100,
That's just a qard hasan.
That's
It's an
qard
interest-free
hasan.
loan.
But it's
But
also
it's still a
from
debt, right?
it's a form of charity.
Yeah.
It's a sadaqah, but it's not considerably. So because it's a charitable contract, a lot of things are waived from the normal contractual
Right.
conditions. So it's sadaqah. But
Yeah.
you return that same value, it's fine.
So the debt by itself is permissible.
It's the increase.
Exactly. And debt by itself, and it's still scary. There's still a lot of, we're told to take debts with caution. The Prophet ﷺ refused to pray or lead the janazah of someone who had a debt. So it's not something that we would take lightly, and I assume it's not something that you would ever kind
Let's
of
be clear,
tell people
riba
to take
is
lightly.
prohibited.
Yeah,
Debts are a big, severe issue we have here.
right.
But we had to be careful what is a debt.
Fine.
And that's the crux we're going trying to get to. We're not saying take a student loan lightly. That's a separate conversation. But you're very, it's very important to make that clear. Riba is a major sin.
Yep.
Nobody's trying to say it's not.
Yeah.
But we're trying to say, is this riba? This is what the crux of I'm trying to get to.
Can riba exist without the debt?
Not in the context of a loan.
We're talking about riba dain. That's what we're restricting the conversation to.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's within the. We're not talking about riba fadl. These other forms
No,
of
no,
riba.
no. So
Let's
as
just
we
keep
know-
it the conversation.
Yeah.
So the terminology is clear.
Can riba exist, so as we understand it generally, without a debt.
Not in the context of a loan. No.
No, not
No.
Riba Day we're talking about.
And
So,
I guess-
so the crux of the matter is, of course, we need to analyze: is there actually a debt here?
Is there a debt and is there an obligation? So the things that we've
Well,
mentioned.
we know there's obligation to return money, but there's
Yeah.
obligation on the investor. So, Umrah's mechanic got to return me my investment
Yeah.
money. That's still an obligation to pay it back.
If it's
If you
left
make
at
profit,
the end, yeah.
but it's conditional. But it's
Yes.
attached to your ability to earn the money or
That's right.
profit. It's not attached to you as an individual.
me as a person, that irrespective of what happens, I have to give that money back. And I think this is quite important because when we look at the features of a dain or a debt, classically they would be that irrespective of what happens to you, you owe that money, right? And if you can't pay that money, that debt is passed on and your estate has to pay that money. That contractually, you are obligated to pay that money. Right? So I think we're all clear on that. In this context, how is it not a debt?
So this is where what the contract says is, here you go, here's some money, it's a loan, it's a debt, there's an interest rate, you've got to pay this back. But actually, you don't have to pay this back.
Right.
Actually, what your liability is that if you have an income in future, then you just give me a share of that income. So the concept of a debt is reversed by the actual liability imposed by the payment conditions in the contract.
So you're saying the contract's contradictory.
Exactly. There's a contradiction in the contract.
On top of this, and I think it'll be quite good for the...
But it's important to understand is when there's a contradiction, then as a jurist, you have to decide which of those two will take precedence over the other, which trumps the other.
Yeah.
Right? And so...
But in this case, not a jurist. It's your job as a lawyer, an English lawyer, to understand English law and how it's enforceable.
Exactly.
Because that's what matters, doesn't it?
Exactly, yeah. So the Islamic jurist will actually here take advice from the English lawyer and ask them, just like they might take advice from a doctor on the question of medical science. The jurist doesn't have to be a doctor. They can take advice from a doctor. So here, the jurist will take advice from an English lawyer and say, right, this contract is clearly contradictory. Which bit of the contract trumps the other?
Yeah.
And here, it's the payment obligations which trump the other fluffy language, which is in other parts of the contract, which are not enforceable.
It's worth pointing out for your sins, you're dual qualified, aren't you, in Sharia law and English law.
That's right. So I can wear both of those
Talking
hats,
to himself.
Takes his own advice.
Yeah. So look, I'll come back to this point about why we consider legally it's not a debt and Sharia it's not a debt. And this is the two. So it's based on your income. If you don't have the requisite income, then you are not obliged. Is that correct? Can I use that term?
You'll never be obliged.
You will never
So
be
let's take
obliged
this
to pay the money.
example. I think it sounds at 65 to 70, you don't have to pay after that, you reach pension age. I think it's a clause like that.
That's right. They've
So
just
if
changed it,
you're-
yeah. It's 40 years now since graduating.
Or certain ages, age limit.
Yes.
So if your mum says, you know what, I've brought you up and I want to go and study engineering for some random reason, okay, or English literature. She can go to university, take the loan, pay it off, take the student grant, live off it and say, oh, I'm 70 now. Thank you, you're not paying anything back. That's what the contract allows.
Yeah, effectively. But these were the various points we were saying. So number one, if you don't earn that threshold income, you are not obligated contractually. You will never be obligated to pay them anything. And they cannot ask you, nor will they ask you for any money, number one. Number two, you can have £10 million in your bank account. You can have £100 million worth of assets. And they will never
Yes, because
come
it's tied
for
to
you.
income.
'Cause
So
it's
it's
tied to
And
important.
not to your personal
And not to your
liability.
person.
So therefore, it doesn't go
That's
to your
right.
non-income based wealth.
Absolutely.
So we need to check. It's worth commenting that the understanding we have now we're talking about is shared by Parliament. If you look at the Parliament papers when they did the research on that, what payment do they expect to pay back for this? They expect about 35, 40% or something.
Even less. Even less.
Yeah.
They didn't expect the majority of people paying the full amount back.
It's around 23% in total that they actually recoup.
So
it's not profit-making.
It's not writing up bad
initiative,
loans.
yeah.
It's not saying I'm lending back money to bad people and I'm going to chase these people and I've got to sell their debt on. It's saying that we do not expect these people to pay it back. It is not legally obliged for them to pay it back. And this expectation, this is not like I'm a loan shark lending you money and I don't reconcile my accounts and pay back. This is literally saying that they will not pay back, not because of our efforts, but they will never earn the money. And it's not part of the legal contract. It's part of the legal contract. We'll give them the money for this. We'll recoup some of the money, and some of the money will be funded by the government taxation system to improve the the manpower investment in the country.
So on top of that, so as we've said that you have to hit the certain income threshold, you don't hit the threshold, you don't pay anything. It doesn't matter how much wealth you have, you do not contractually have to give them anything, nor will anyone ask you to pay anything. Thirdly, if you were to be declared bankrupt and let's just say all of your other debts are accumulated, this isn't a debt that's included because it's not seen as an obligation. So when it comes
we
down
talked
to
about, we talked about the liability. We said that it's firmly attached. This isn't firmly attached because it's not attached to you. It's attached to your income.
That's right.
So it's firmly attached to your income, no problem.
Yeah.
But it's not firmly attached to you.
So normally,
which is a feature of an investment contract, because an
right.
investment contract attaches, your liability attaches to income, not to your person.
So it's worth going back here. We know there's a prohibited opinion and there's like opinion of illicity is permitted. It's worth saying these are both valid opinions. There's a prohibited opinion. You're free to follow that opinion.
Yeah.
It's got its justification. Look, says interest in the contract. It says it's interest. You say you got a loan to that. If you feel that's safer for you and you're comfortable with that opinion, fine. That's perfectly valid to you. The position paper BBSI is publishing shows the opinion of prohibition. It details it. But it also discusses this opinion quite in detail because this is quite new to people. And it digs into detail why the position that Sheikh Salman is advancing and is that of licity and why it's permitted.
Yeah.
So it's worth saying that there are two opinions in this.
Yeah, of course. And I think the one where there's riba in it, it's quite clear people will understand interest and obviously, and I think it's important reminding people about the prohibition of interest. Sheikh, maybe you can say a few things on this actually, because we do live in a time where riba is completely normalized. People treat it very lightly, and people are drowning in riba.
Yeah, I mean, this is a matter not to be taken lightly at all, because there's a famous verse in the Quran where Allah declares war. He says, فَأْذَنُوا بِحَرْبٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. Allah and His Messenger declare war on people who deal in riba.
Yeah.
And so, as a person who studied Sharia and dedicated my life to studying and practicing Islamic finance and applying the Sharia in our lives and trying to do that to the best of my ability, I feel very strongly about riba. Of course, naturally, it's something my day job is to help people to avoid riba. That's my job.
Yeah.
Right? I'm also very cautious about certain practices we have in the current day Islamic banking and Islamic finance industry, where we reverse engineer it or replicate conventional ribawi contracts using Islamic contracts. I'm very cautious about those things. I steer clear of those things. So I'm not a person who's pushing the envelope, trying to create ways to engineer Islamic forms of interest or riba. No, but
I'd say you're on quite the conservative side of that spectrum. If anything,
exactly. Yeah,
you're not. There's quite risk averse. So you're uncomfortable with a lot of the structures.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but ultimately we have to look at
in terms of Sharia risk.
In
terms of Sharia compliance risk, if you think of that way, that for example, the ideas of debt and stuff, you're taking quite a cautious approach in this one here.
Yeah.
So the fact you're pushing
I'm
this
very cautious of debt in the context of a financing relationship, because that's what really results in replication of ribawi contract, where you have a debt and more is paid on top of that debt. It's a red flag. Whereas here, counterintuitively, even though it says interest and debt and it's got scary language in it, I have to apply the Sharia principles and say, well, actually, I need to look at the substance of the contract. What's actually happening here? Despite these words, what's actually happening? What is the actual liability on the student?
So your process really is we have to understand the reality of the contract before we even discuss permissible or not.
Yes.
And you say you feel that there's, I don't know if this is great, it's been a superficial understanding of the contract. Nobody's gone through it in depth to really, really dig into it.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, in the symposium that we had, you remember there were a good 30 or 40 scholars there. And most of them had an opinion on the student loan contract, and many of them believed it was prohibited. But when we asked who's actually read the contract or taken advice from an English lawyer who has read the contract, I think only 1 or 2 people had. Yeah. And so
we need to be founded on the reality of the contract. And a lot of the values comes through. You look at the contract, you understand the reality of it. We spend a lot of time digging into the thing to understand what it is. Yeah. So, for example, when we talk about another example, like Islamic mortgages, non-Islamic mortgages, a lot of the thing we talked about negative equity, the liability on the property, the price drops, is these sort of conditions happen. And a lot of time spent is in weird scenarios. What happens if the property price burns? If the property burns down, who's liable for it? Yeah. This is the same way you test the contract. Right. Because you see, what does this look like? Just because I said it is a loan, is this a loan? What happens here? Does it have the same characteristics? And when you do this student loan contract, okay, it's more of a student finance contract. It's not really a loan. It's just we're financing a student, and it's akin to a graduate tax.
I was just going to say this. The interesting thing is that actually this isn't just a view held by Muslim jurists, that actually some certain non-Muslims have this view that actually it's much more like a graduate tax. Martin Lewis, from Money Saving Expert, he says this isn't a debt, and you'll find quite a few different commentators on this that actually...
And parliamentarians agreed with them as well.
Yeah,
exactly.
But for political reasons, they couldn't call it a graduate tax because you can't pass another tax without irritating a lot of people. We're trying to cut taxes, so...
And also because if people go abroad, you can't actually tax people on income abroad in the same way. Yeah. So these are the realities at play as well.
It requires legislative change. It's easier to call it a loan to a contract in this way. Exactly. So it's been passed for certain reasons, but it's quite a hybrid, ugly contract that's confusing. So it's very difficult to get clarity on what the actual reality of the contract is.
Yeah.
But when you strip into it, the real thing is the lack of obligation to repay the debt. Yeah, sure, some people pay the entire back. The guys who make a lot of money, they'll pay it all back, or they'll pay it back in their lifetime. But the same way, if I invested Umar's mechanics and he made a killing and he basically did really well, I'll get my money back and profit.
Absolutely.
But that's only if...
And I think it's so important to understand, we can comment upon the Sheikh Salman, that if you look at the players involved in this, the reason maybe you yourselves as scholars look at it, it's the governing authority. So it's the state and its provision of education that it's providing to its subjects.
Yeah.
So it's different to a commercial contract with commercial realities. Yeah. Is there a level of flexibility because of that, or does it make a difference?
You're signing a contract with the party, aren't you, really? So the fact that the state's being done, we can understand from the intention of the state why they're doing it. Yeah. And you see, if you look around the world, there's different ways of financing. For example, in America, the student loans, you can't get out of them in bankruptcy. It's a very, very different model to we have here.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, I mean, the fact that it's the state could suggest that it's not really a commercial contract. It's a charitable type contract. It's
charitable, it's trying to be self-sufficient. It's trying to recoup.
And they have a right to tax.
I think it's redistributive. I think the better way is to redistribute the money. It's trying to redistribute the people who are taking advantage of education, who did... So I sent you to university, 5 people. 3 people do really well because they're to university. Can you contribute more back to subsidize people? You can kind of think it in that way there. The guy who goes there becomes a teacher. He never earns more than, I don't know, whatever teachers start on now. Spends a career doing that. He's provided service to the country, but he'll never be able to pay back his education because the salaries, for example, or a nurse or certain other jobs.
So it's society making a decision that it's worth educating people like that to re-educate the next generation. And that's a cost to society that we all pay through the taxation system.
But this is like an intention issue we're talking about.
Yeah.
But we don't even need to go that deep. It just goes to the contract itself.
Yeah, so even the technical analysis of the contract, which is what we've talked about so far, yields that it's not a debt.
Right.
But this is an interesting discussion because if you think about it, the experience of what the student pays is actually exactly the same experience of their income tax.
Yeah.
Because if they pay 9% of any income earned above a threshold, that just adds on to the percentage.
They don't see that money. They don't get that money. Right, it's taken at source.
If I say to you, for example, Omar, you're going to go to university, graduate, no problem. I'm going to charge you 9% till you die, till you finish earning. That's not an unreasonable thing to agree. You agree to it.
Yeah.
I'm nice. Strange thing to describe the government as nice, but you say they're nice. They say, you know what? I spent 100 grand educating you. If you give me back 200 grand, I'm capping at the 200 grand.
Yeah.
That doesn't, it just be more generous to you. So the whole RPI, inflation, interest contract is just their way of trying to be fair to cap the total amount you're paying. I'm not saying your graduate tax ends till you die. I'm saying that if I do this money, that's sufficient. That'll do me.
So a lot of people ask us when we say, well, if there's no debt, therefore there's no riba, there's all, the capital is still there. You get a statement saying this is how much you still owe. You get a statement saying this is how much interest is accrued, and it looks like a mountain because I'm a low earner and it's just getting bigger and bigger. Oh my God, people get scared. I get young people saying, I'm scared. I've got this burden of debt like accruing on my shoulders. What am I going to? Am I going to die with this? And they get afraid. So what we need to understand is actually that has no reality. All that does is determine how much sooner. It's just a metric to determine how much sooner the contract will end, how much sooner than 40 years, and how much they'll cap it at. So it's actually something that benefits the student.
It's really saying to you that if you earn a lot, you pay it off in 20 years. If you don't and you finish 35 years or 40 years, whatever it is now, it's like, All right.
I guess
This will write off this amount of money.
I guess
Right.
if I say to you, if you make £10 million, you've got to give me £1 million. And every year I remind you of that. If you make £10 million, you've got to give me £1 million. It means nothing, does it? Just like that, because
But you don't know, Sheikh.
no, of course I'm not.
Business,
No, but
right?
just me saying it doesn't. I can
Yeah.
send him letters every year saying, if you make £10 million, remember.
But
owe
you
me-
can never pursue me.
No, of course
Because
not.
yeah,
because
we don't
It's
have
a
a
kind
contract
of-
which allows you to do that.
That's
exactly.
right.
Exactly the same in the student loan.
Yeah.
The student loans company will send you these statements. They have no ability to ever pursue you for that. The
Yeah.
only thing that they can ever require you to do is to give them a percentage of income above a threshold if earned.
Absolutely. So I guess, look, there's a couple of other things that I think would be good for us to discuss. So, alhamdulillah, I think we've established that the view BBSI have taken in this paper.
No, this is not. Let me be clear. This is not a view of the BBSI.
in this
BBSI.
paper.
No, no,
Okay, go on.
the view. No, I'll be very clear about this.
Yeah.
BBSI is not mandating the opinion to take
Okay.
prohibited or not prohibited. If you look in the back of the form, there's a survey saying that the scholars are divided on this issue.
Yeah.
But the mainstream, not to say mainstream, the main public opinion, which people know about, is prohibition.
Right.
So we don't need to detail that because everybody knows it's prohibited. Why?
Yeah.
So we're basically digging real detail on why the view that is prohibited, not prohibited, is permitted, is in detail.
Sure.
But it's BBSI's position has never been to mandate you to follow an opinion or say
Okay.
this is binding on you. It's to give you an opinion, explain the issues to you, and say, and this is a separate conversation. This is licity. Is it permitted to do this or not? I can say to you, is it permitted for me to go to a restaurant to buy £1,000 meal? There's nothing obviously there. Is it wise thing to do? That's a separate conversation. Whether or not it's right for you to take a student loan and go to university is a totally separate conversation to the one we're having, that is the contract in itself prohibited or not. But BBSI is not going to take a position to say to you, this is halal or haram. We say these are both opinions.
Yep.
Okay. And you're free to take whichever opinion you follow. Talk to your religious advisor, talk to your local imam. Ask him to read the paper first so he can explain it to you if you struggle to understand it. But we're just basically, this opinion is quite, I think it's unique work being done by Sheikh Salman when he went through the whole contract, went in detail. The things we're talking about, riba, gharar, and these are not new concepts. These are standard Islamic finance things. But applying it in this way to this contract and understanding the contract in depth has not been done, which is why a lot of the time in the paper is spent on this, because it's new and needs depth understanding. But that doesn't mean we're enforcing or saying this.
No, of course not. And I guess this was my point, was that the paper lays out this
Both
view.
opinions.
And, yeah, both opinions.
Yeah.
But it does actually, as we said, that, the Riba position is quite clear, those who hold
Nobody
it.
differs on
Yeah.
riba being prohibited.
Yeah.
The question really saying is, does riba apply to this contract or not? And why do both opinions exist?
Yeah.
That's what it's about.
And also just to add, I mean, obviously, mashallah, yourselves who worked on the contract, even I looked at it, and then there's a number of other scholars as well. Sheikh Haytham has had this view, Sheikh al-Haddad, that it's been permissible for a while, but this is the first time it's been documented like this, laid out clearly, referring back to the contract in the various clauses. Sheikh Sajid, Umar gave an input into this as well. Brother Almir Kolan, he also input into this as an Islamic finance specialist. So it's good just for people
There's
to
a lot
understand.
of people going
Yeah.
through this contract, there's a lot of discussion. This is a culmination of a lot of debates. We did a symposium on this contract. We discussed it, bashed it back
Even a
and forth.
census, even a survey was done.
We did a survey
of
to see
people.
people's view.
Yeah.
Right, before we discussed it, what's people's general view on this contract? And the view is like, it's haram, it's halal. Why is it halal? People said it's halal because of hajj, because you need to, because you have no choice.
Yeah.
And they said, well, it's graduate tax. There's different views in there. But we could see from the variety of views, there's a lack of clarity what does this contract entail. So I said, fine, let's put part of this to the side. Forget the conclusions where we can get to. Let's go to the contract and work out what it actually entails. That's what Sheikh Salman did.
Good. And the reason I'm saying this is because whichever position you take, permissible or impermissible,
No
right?
sense on either person.
Right?
Take whichever you feel is better.
Exactly. That question still needs to be answered, as you said, by the individual, whether they should pursue further education, whether it's right for them. This is that's still a question that should be taken, and it's irrespective of
That's
this.
not a discussion to have with necessarily a scholar
Yeah,
imam,
absolutely.
because this is a discussion of your personal circumstances. Is education, is it good in itself, or is it basically something you want to do for a career? Does it suit your lifestyle? Is apprentices better? This is not a question we're trying to answer in this
No.
paper. To be very clear, so it'd be
But it is
education.
important because when you look
Yeah.
at the levels of, I guess, literacy, when you look at socioeconomic development, there's a high correlation with education and, lack of education and low socioeconomic development. So traditionally we've been told, go to university, it creates better economic outcomes for yourself.
We do know education, surveys say education does add to your income. We know it does, and it does your lifetime income, and there's correlation between these things. And it's a general society level.
Yeah.
But as for you as an individual to make your choice, that's a separate matter.
Okay. And this is why I want to address perhaps some of those people who, despite the arguments that are presented for the permissibility, they may still feel hesitant. And so for them, and pursuing an education they feel is something that they should do. So for them, there is the other opinion that actually from a needs perspective, that they can still engage with the student finance or student loan. Is that correct?
If they feel that, then if they feel it's benefit for them as an individual to engage it, we're not saying, the only discussion we're having is the door open or closed for you to take a student finance agreement. We're not saying to you, take a student loan, go to education, go and study, I don't know, theatre and drama. Yeah. It's up to you, but that's a decision, is what you just work out best for you and your lifestyle, your family, and your circumstances.
So I think what you're saying is that there are students out there who have done that thought. They've consulted their advisors, their parents, and they've come to the conclusion that they do want to do a particular educational course, but they're being cautious about it because they don't want to get into this quote unquote student debt.
Yeah.
And for them, there is, or they follow the view that, or the view of the scholars who say that it is in principle prohibited. But then many of those same scholars also say, because of the haja, the necessity, then the need for education at a societal level, because education connects to your life expectancy, your well-being, and so many other sort of socioeconomic factors. There is a very strong body of opinion that, despite it being in principle prohibited, it's permissible in the circumstance because of the necessity of education.
Yeah. That's kind of the splitting of the halal view or the permitted view. It's permitted because it's no riba, or it's permitted because it's haja. So, yeah.
How do you understand haja for the
haja is general need. So, I don't want to dig into Maqasid here.
Yeah.
But I'm saying that people say that you have a darura, which is a necessary need. Like you need to eat food or you need somewhere to live. But go to school is not, education is not a haja. You can fulfill it another way. But when they say discussion, this is already separate to conversation. But when the haja becomes open standard need, then it becomes elevated in Maqasid theory to darura. This is not really on to go and dig into this detail because it's a long technical conversation.
Yeah. And
we've seen this before with the ECFR fatwa about interest-based mortgages for houses. So it's that kind of topic in there. Yeah. But it's not really the focus we discussed in the paper.
No.
Because we didn't think it's necessary. It's important to understand why some people say, it's prohibited, it's riba, but that gives context understanding. But we didn't really delve into that issue in the paper in the way.
Okay. But now there's also, a number of other options available if people do want to pursue further education.
Apprenticeships.
Apprenticeships. There's other organizations doing it part-time, for example. Even there's organizations like Gard Hassan, it's called Gard Hassan, where it's apprenticeship and also like interest-free loan to do these things. So it's not that your options are completely closed if you think it's impermissible.
And it's laudable to be cautious about this.
Absolutely.
The fact is you're worried about riba is a good thing. It's not. It's a good thing. It's action that's had no party in taqwa. You're being careful about transactions. You're careful about this. And be careful avoiding the haram.
Yeah, I get parents who bring their children to me because their children don't want to go to university because of this. And some of them have an offer to study medicine or have a career that will benefit society as well.
It's not a rare thing. It's quite a common feature.
And what I say to the parents, because the parents are distraught, father comes along with his daughter and she's got into medicine, she's not going to go. Yeah. And I congratulate the father first. I say, you've brought up a good child because they have wara. They have, they're cautious in their deen. And so this is something to celebrate. This is very important.
It's very laudable, praiseworthy trait.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. Okay, and so the last thing I wanted to actually discuss was, at the point of us recording this, there's been active discussions around a quote-unquote Sharia-compliant version of student financing. And the reason I'm saying it like that is because we consider it, I can speak for us knowing this, permissible as it is. But for those who don't consider it permissible, there's been a lot of work going on in the last few years around coming up with a Sharia-compliant version. I don't think the final structure has been publicized yet. But if there is...
The draft papers are publicized.
Yeah.
So... There's one thing talking about. Take someone. How long do these 4 pages take you? These 4 contracts take you to understand?
They didn't take me long to read, because you can read several hundred pages in a few days, but it took a long time to read through them and really understand the substance over the form. Yes.
And the substance of the Sharia-compliant loan is probably more complicated in the way it's working. To try, because it's very important to understand the government said that the Sharia-compliant loan has to replicate the liabilities and the cash flows of the conventional loan.
Yeah.
So essentially, we talked in the beginning that the alfaz are important, the language is less important, the cash flows. So we're essentially replicating in a Sharia-compliant way the same cash flows and liabilities as the conventional contract.
Yeah. So that whatever liability the student has in the current student loan contract, the government has made it absolutely clear exactly the same liability has to apply to the Sharia-compliant version. So those of us who look at the current contract and consider it in substance to be permissible, we don't really have a problem how you recharacterize it.
That's right.
Isn't it? It's no different, because the substance is going to remain the same. And so I don't think, for me, it won't change anything, except it will change one important thing.
Yep.
Yeah. It will give solace to a lot of people, a lot of students out there who might be opting out of education because there isn't an option available for them. If this opens that door for them, then that can't be a bad thing.
Yeah. If you think that it's prohibited and you base it you're not really comfortable, but the Sharia-compliant one stamps your book, go for it. Yeah. Give you that option. That's the value that gives to the contract and gives to people.
But the previous conversation still applies, even though it's Sharia-compliant. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to pursue an education if it's not
We're
right
just
for you.
talking about
still
these are separate conversations.
Yeah.
Can you go to university with student finance? That's the conversation we're having. Should you? It's a different conversation.
Yeah. But we welcome it, I think, absolutely, if there is going to be some movement from the government to produce something that appeals to Muslims. And we would argue that perhaps it would have been easier
the accommodation
to change,
is good.
the language in the existing contract. But if it's if they're going down this other route, I can say for myself, and I know, Sheikh Salman, you share this view, that the general problem with Islamic finance as an industry is the highly structured, engineered nature of it, which replicates conventional debt. In this case, because as you said, we're okay with the asl of what's going on, then actually the replication of it still...
It's reversed this way, isn't it?
Yeah,
exactly. The other way around. So a lot of Islamic finance, there's a lot of things we can have. That's a separate long conversation about issues with Islamic financing or financial engineering.
Yeah. And
replicating debts and how the liabilities moved around. That's a separate conversation. But yeah, this contract, even though it looks horrendous, complicated, the end of it, so this is not really oppressive.
Yeah.
They're making some nice clauses in here. They're trying to be fair, even find the increased number for years. The middle class get targeted more than the very rich because they pay it for a long period of time. But they're saying they're trying to tighten out RPI, which is basically the value of the money, not inflation. There's things being done to trying to reduce the oppression in the contract if you want to treat it them. So to make that to manageable levels. But it's not in and of itself a bad contract. It's just overly complicated. So nobody really sees it. It's scary more than anything else. Writing loans, stand, but fine, it scares people.
Yeah.
But once you strip away from it, it's like, okay, this is just that. It's just graduate tax.
Graduate tax, okay. Any closing words from yourself, Sheikh Salman?
No, I think young people should really think about what's the right thing for them.
Yeah.
This is also ultimately a financial decision. It's a social decision.
And a time decision. You're spending a number of years at university.
Exactly, yeah. And then they're going to pay 9% of an income above a certain threshold. So it might be worth doing some financial modelling for themselves of what their future prospects might be and what they might ultimately pay, and then make a financial decision.
Or a personal decision. It's not necessarily university is not for everyone.
Yeah.
It's for some people if they wish to do so. So it's not just a financial... University is never just about going to get a job. It's also about, does it increase your broaden your mind, or does it study stuff which would be useful to you or your family or what you want to do?
Jazakumullah khair to both of yourselves. And we really recommend all of you, is the paper is going to be out in the next couple of weeks, inshallah. Watch this space. You can go to bbsi.org to find, inshallah, the finished paper. Go through it. If you're not that well versed in finance, maybe sit with someone to go through it, take it to your local imam, etc. Have discussions on it. And I think generally it's really important that as Muslims, when we're living in a time of immense amounts of change, unprecedented things are happening. We're living in a time of, you're talking about the metaverse and things like this happening, AI, organ transplants, and so on and so forth. How do we interact or understand these different challenges that we have? And so we really need jurists to step up to the mark, inshallah. And alhamdulillah, like yourselves have done now and others. But for all of us to actually go a layer deeper, not just look at things superficially. As you said, I think it's really important. Something is known by its reality, not its terminology. We shouldn't be superficial people. We should be people of substance.
And I thank Sheikh Salman for doing this work on this contract, the time invested in understanding that detail work to make it clearer to all of us how the contract works. Because without work, we couldn't really make this progress we did in this paper.
Well, I'd reciprocate that, because it was Sheikh Imran who first alerted me to the fact that actually, in substance, this looks very much like a graduate tax as opposed to a debt.
Yeah, this was a group effort for the contract. The work we did in the paper, through the whole symposium, and lots of heated discussions and debates to try and get to this.
And I'm sure the debates will continue once the papers come out. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.